So in my last video, we talked a lot about the higher voltage architecture, what the peak charging speed of the Cybertruck is going to be, because basically at the Tesla Semi delivery event, there was a lot of evidence that Tesla wants to prioritize high range with not just the Semi, but perhaps the Cybertruck as well. We don't have concrete confirmation on the range target that Tesla is actually aiming for, but I'm going to entertain the idea that I've been wrong with my previous predictions on trying to lower expectations, and Tesla is mostly going to be limited by batteries. And for that reason, because demand is so insanely high for the Cybertruck, they're going to settle for around 300 miles of range and still charge a lot for it, and that will disappoint most people. Vast majority of reservations will be canceled, but it won't matter because the few people who don't are still gonna have to wait for a long time because the Cybertruck is not going to ramp all that quickly. So assuming I'm incorrect on that, and let's say there's another limiting factor. Cells are not what's preventing Cybertruck production. Maybe they're limited by how many exoskeletons they can build, or how many chips are available, or maybe they're limited by the armored glass or what have you, or even Elon just puts his foot down and says, I don't care what it takes, I don't care what it costs, the Cybertruck needs to have 500 miles of range, or at least over 400 for instance. Well, I can tell you confidently based on the fact that the Cybertruck is much larger than the Plaid Model X, and as far as we know, they're starting with the quad motor powertrain, so that means more motors than a Model X Plaid, and it has rear wheel steering, and it has larger tires, plus much larger side view mirrors and a much larger frontal surface area with a less overall aerodynamic design than the Plaid Model X. The Cybertruck is going to be Tesla's least efficient vehicle in terms of what the consumers are available to buy, because the Tesla Semi you can't actually buy anymore. This means that if you guys are right and Tesla is going to make a 400 to 500 mile range Cybertruck, this thing is going to need a massively huge battery pack. In fact, having that bigger battery pack actually makes your efficiency worse. So to compensate for it, you have to include more batteries. So if Tesla decides to not compromise on range, and I'm wrong, we're talking easily a 180, maybe 200 kilowatt hour battery pack, depending on which range target Tesla is shooting for. And while yes, that does make the Cybertruck a way cooler vehicle, and it should make towing a bit easier, although it doesn't really solve the problem of superchargers not being optimized for vehicles with trailers behind them. High range is cool, no doubt there. Everybody wants more range, but it's absolutely going to drive the price of the Cybertruck higher. Keep in mind, in my previous predictions, I've always said that the market dictates the price of a product, right? Like, Tesla's not going to price the product so absurdly high that no one will buy it, and they're also not going to price it so absurdly low that the wait time is 6 years, and basically Tesla is making less money per vehicle, but everybody who's buying the truck is flipping it for a profit, scalping off of that demand versus supply issue. That doesn't make much sense for the company either. So they have to set the price on the Cybertruck to a reasonable amount that they don't have an absurdly long backlog that's like 5 to 6 years, but also not so insanely high that no one is willing to pay for it. That's really the prediction we're making when we're talking about range and pricing and things. My personal prediction, based on the fact that Rivian and Ford are both having no problem selling vehicles for $100,000, and GM with the Hummer EV, they're selling $100,000 pickup trucks with around 300 miles of range. So my thought process is Tesla by no means has tried to be the cheapest EV in any competition. Usually Teslas are more expensive than a lot of their alternatives because they've got the better software and they've got the better charging network. Same thing here with the Cybertruck. I think they've got the better software and the better charging network, plus a bunch of other advantages like the super unique design, way more durable and rigid than most other electric pickup trucks. And I bet the acceleration, the horsepower, the towing capacity, the payload is probably gonna beat everybody else, and then the debate just comes down to the range. So assuming I'm wrong and they prioritize that high range, that means that Tesla is gonna have such a unique advantage on all other electric trucks. If it prioritizes that higher range, they're beating out the Rivian in terms of practicality, range, durability. They're beating out the Ford in terms of range, practicality, durability, and of course charging network software. That's a big reason to buy an electric vehicle over another brand. And no, Tesla's not just gonna magically open every supercharger to every non-Tesla. It's only gonna be at new V4 locations, which currently there are none. And it should be mentioned that just the concept of a 400 mile range Cybertruck or a 500 mile range Cybertruck, there are so few EVs on the market that have range that far, let alone a pickup truck with range that far. Not even Tesla offers many EVs that beat that. Like the long range Model S is the only EV Tesla offers right now that can break the 400 mile range mark, and it's just barely over 400, and there's still a lot of people convinced the Cybertruck can get to 500. Just keep in mind for a second as you're recommending that, like, oh yeah, they'll put a 180, maybe 200 kilowatt hour battery pack in there. That means that a Cybertruck with twice the motors of a Model S, twice the battery pack, more engineering for the air compressor, the onboard outlets to plug into, armored glass, a much larger vehicle with more seats, the bed vault cover, the tailgate ramp, all the exoskeleton engineering, all the complexities involved with this vehicle that's meant to be better for off-road use and tighter turns. In the most recent prototypes, it should be mentioned that they have a display behind the steering yoke, and none of the parts get to be reused. This is not like they get to carry over a bunch of Model S seats and Model 3 or Model Y seats, or the same steering wheel they used, or the Model 3 and Y gets to be carried over. Even the display has to be from a different supplier, which means this vehicle, just like the Model S and X, is going to take a long time for production to ramp, which ultimately means low supply, lots of demand. What does Tesla do when they have way more demand than supply? They do what they did with the refreshed Model S and X and the Model 3 and Y. They raise prices. So the Cybertruck with double the batteries, double the motors, much more physical mass is supposed to cost, a lot of you are assuming, less than the long-range Model S, which, by the way, the 400-mile range Tesla, the only one right now, costs $105,000. So just for the idea of there being any electric vehicle that could go 500 miles on a charge, Tesla could get away with charging way more. The only EV on the market right now, aside from the semi-truck, that's capable of breaking 500 miles of range is the Lucid Air Grand Touring Range Edition, which starts around $150,000, and that's a sedan. It's not even a hatchback, right? That's just a 5-seater luxury piece that Lucid's having a hard time selling. Tesla's not going to have a hard time selling the Cybertruck at all, which is why my point is, if you guys are right, and the range is this high, and in my opinion, the only reason the range would be high is because the batteries are no longer the limiting factor. There's something else going into the Cybertruck, whether it be the castings or the exoskeleton or the chips. Something is preventing them from building more of these trucks, so they decide, you know what, let's just do 400, 500 mile range. That means they could easily get away with charging $120, $130, maybe $140,000 for this truck, because literally nothing else on the market could compete with a truck or any vehicle with range that high. I mean, at this point, there is no EV on the road with supercharger access that can go over 500 miles of range on a charge. Don't count the semi, we don't even know what charge port that's using. So yes, the product itself would be amazing, and it would be incredible, I agree, if you could take such a large, capable vehicle with so much payload capacity, so much rigidity and durability for 400 or 500 miles of range on a charge. But keep in mind, every time you guys argue with me on that and say, yes, they are going to prioritize the range, that means they can definitely justify charging way more for that product. If Tesla is only putting a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack in the long-range Model S, and they still can't keep up with demand for that, there's still a wait time on that vehicle, and Elon keeps saying the Cybertruck will be our best product, typically companies charge the highest amount for their best product, you know? And currently the long-range Model X starts over $120,000. Even that is more aerodynamic and uses a smaller battery pack than the Cybertruck does, and has less motors. So I think it's very likely that if Tesla does prioritize the high range, which I'm not entirely convinced they will, that means it could be one of the most expensive vehicles Tesla ever asks for. And similar to the launch of the 4680 Model Y, which we thought we were going to get a bunch of answers at Cyber Rodeo and then didn't. We didn't really know if we had the official range numbers, and we didn't know what Tesla was charging for it. We didn't know if only employees were taking delivery. I think similar to how the Tesla Semi event was lacking on a ton of details. We still don't know the curb weight. We still don't know the payload capacity or the price for the Semi anymore. Does it have autopilot, convoy mode? We don't know a bunch of stuff. I get the feeling that next year there will probably be very similar events for the Cybertruck where they're like, okay, production has started. Okay, deliveries have begun. But even if through the EPA we know the range, we might not necessarily know the price, because Tesla will only deliver the truck to employees for the first couple months, and we're gonna have to wait a long time before we actually figure out what people are paying for these things. Tesla in recent history seems to go pretty vague and get kind of quiet during a lot of these product unveilings, particularly when there's some bad news that they don't want to address. So keep in mind that I'm not just advocating the Cybertruck range should be low because I want it to be a disappointment. I really don't. I would love it if the Cybertruck was $80,000 and it qualified for your precious tax credit and it went 500 miles range on a charge and it cured cancer. That would all be great. But when I say that the range is lower, that also means that I want it to be remotely affordable, close to the price of a Rivian or a Ford or a Hummer EV, opposed to being the most expensive option in the business, which honestly is not unheard of for Tesla, especially when you compare the Model Y pricing to the Mach-E or the ID4 or the Chevy Bolt. You know, there's lots of cheaper alternatives, but Tesla knows they have the best option. And I get the feeling they're going to have a very similar impression of the Cybertruck. It's going to have the great durability, the big bed, the great towing capacity, the great software, the great charging network. If it has the great range too, yeah, that means they can charge kind of whatever they want, because if you're not willing to pay it, someone will. That's basically the power a company has when they have this much demand for a product. And I can just tell by the web traffic alone, everybody wants the Cybertruck. There's so much news surrounding it. Everybody wants updates from it. And the fact that they have kind of renounced the specs from the website makes me feel like the real specs aren't going to be all that great. So in my view, it's pretty likely that either we're going to have a high-range Cybertruck that costs north of $120,000, or we're gonna have a 300-mile range Cybertruck where there's a chance it could start under $100,000. Either way though, no matter what updates they provide, good or bad, I'll be sure to document them here on this channel for you guys. So thanks again for all of our Patreon supporters supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.